Bloom. Connecting. Get recording. Hi, good evening. Welcome everybody to Forest and Society. We are an interdisciplinary journal with a focus on Southeast Asia. Today, we are very fortunate to be talking to Dr. Ahmad Dhiaulhaq, who has produced one of the more highly cited publications in our journal. The title of the paper is Forest, Water, and People, the Roles and Limits of Mediation in Transforming Watershed Conflict in Northern Thailand. Dr. Dhiaulhaq, thank you for joining us today. Do you want
Thank
to
you for
tell us a
having
little
me.
bit about yourself and the work that you're doing now and the context of the work that you were doing when you published this research?
Yeah, thank you, Micah, and thanks for Forest and Society for having me and selecting our paper to be presented in this interview. And then, yeah, so I'm currently a postdoctoral researcher at KTLV, Royal Netherlands Institute for Southeast Asian and Caribbean Studies, based in Leiden, Netherlands, where I'm now doing research on general patterns of land conflicts related to expansion of large-scale plantations in Indonesia and how they have been resolved. But just to be clear that just to clarify that this article is based on our research work in RICOF, the Center for People and Forests, back in 2012, 2013, where we conducted a regional study on conflict mediation in forest sector in Southeast Asia. So yes, so this is from the previous work in RICOF, the Center for People and Forests.
That's great, thank you. Can you give us a little bit of background? What were the initial reasons that you did this research? What drove you and the co-authors to develop this research in the way that it came about?
Yeah, thank you. So it's a bit of story, but I will try to make it short. So back in 2010, RICOF conducted research on forest conflict in Asia, which was conducted in around 7 case studies in some countries in Asia, including China, Vietnam, Cambodia, Vietnam, Indonesia, regarding the general pattern of the causes and the impacts of forest and land conflict in Asia. So the interesting finding of this conflict is that about 5 out of 7 cases in this conflict has been resolved through mediation, third-party mediation, and some of them are quite successful. So recommendation of this research is that we need to do further analysis to understand the role of the mediation in resolving or transforming forest conflict in Southeast Asia. So as a follow-up of that research, in 2012 and 2013, we conducted a regional study on the role of mediation in resolving forest and land conflict in Southeast Asia, conducted in Thailand, Cambodia, and Indonesia. So this article is based on one of our case study in Northern Thailand in Chiang Mai.
I think that's really interesting. You know, a lot of people do research on conflict and there's much less on mediation. And it's really interesting that these mediation cases have been successful. But to take a step back, can you tell us a little bit about what was the nature of the conflict? What was the conflict happening in this region that you were doing this study?
Thank you. So yeah, oh yes, I haven't mentioned that in this research project, we're interested in understanding the application of mediation in different type of conflict in forest conflict. I mean, for example, in Indonesia, we're focusing on the conflict on palm oil and pulpwood plantations. And in Thailand, we do some related conflict with national park. And this case is very interesting, I think, compared to other cases, is that this conflict is very more complex than the others in terms of actors. For example, we can say in this conflict, there are in this watershed, although the conflict is mainly between upland communities and lowland communities. But actually, if we do more research on this, there are very complex actors, including about 23 community groups, although they are more also can be combined in 3 main groups. For example, first is Pakakeo, we call it Pakakeo or Karen people. And the second one is Hmong ethnic groups. And also, of course, Thai, majority of them are Thai native in northern Thailand. But also there are also government officials and national park officers, because there are three big national parks in this area. First is Obluang National Park and Doi Intanon National Park, and also nature reserve in the area. So this very complex nature of actors in this conflict. I mean, if we compare to, for example, some palm oil conflicts, usually the conflict parties are very limited for two, for example, between the palm oil company and also the local community or indigenous communities, for example. So this kind of complex situation actually require different approach in resolving this conflict. That's what makes it very interesting for study.
It sounds like there's many different stakeholders, which is always very difficult to, to develop a research method around. And I'd really like to ask you a little bit more about the methods. Because of the complexity of this situation, tell us a little bit about how you approach doing this research. What were the methods that you applied? And at Forest and Society, we're always very interested in engaging on methodological issues. So this is a really interesting issue for us.
Yeah, thank you. Great question. I think, with the nature of researching conflict, I think, especially with this complex situation, I think our approach is we aim to ensure that we can involve as representative as possible in terms of community actors. For example, in this research, we try in, so, okay, we use several data gathering methods. First is the main method is, of course, semi-structured and in-depth interviews with key actors. And the second one is we also conducted focus group discussions and also field observations. So for example, for the interviews, we aim to be quite representative in selecting our participants. We include different communities in upland communities, like including representatives from Hmong and Karen communities, and also in lowland communities. We also interview different actors from Thai, native Thai in northern Thailand. And also we include, of course, the importance of this government official who work in national park, in Doi Intanon and Obluang, and also NGOs who work in this area. So I think this is important to get this variety of opinions and perspective to understand comprehensively about the conflict and how this conflict has been resolved. Yeah.
Well, I think there's a lot to learn about conflict resolution, a lot that we can explore further about mediation, especially these fascinating case studies that you're raising about the successful approaches to mediation. One thing that I'd like to ask you about further is what are the key findings? What did you come away with? Things that were unsurprising to you, things that were the main takeaways from conducting this research?
Yeah, thank you. Before coming to the main finding on the mediation itself, I think this research exemplify the complexity, the complex nature, and we are happy that we can do this through process tracing. Like we trace the processes of how actually the conflict evolved since for example, from before 1980s to the 90s and in 2000s, and how actually the conflict is very dynamic, and it's evolved at the same time with the changing of livelihood, the changing of government policies, and how this all interact and shape the dynamic of conflicts a long time. And as you know that, so it's interesting to see how several social, environmental, and economic changes in the area actually directly and indirectly affected the relationship of people between who live in upland communities, indigenous communities who live in upland, and more Thai ethnic groups who live in downstream areas. Yes, and regarding the mediation itself, of course, we found that external parties are quite important to help these different actors to have a conversation. Basically, I mean, in the past there are also attempts to discuss and to resolve this conflict. But for example, when it's facilitated by the government, who is, for example, also being part of the conflict itself, sometimes it doesn't always help in resolving the conflict. So when there is an external parties who is quite, let's say, neutral, and then quite can be trusted by all the conflict actors, it's quite helpful to change the conflict dynamics, and can gain trust between actors to start working on and joining the mediation process to resolve this conflict. So our key finding is first that yes, the role of external third party who are neutral and capable of mediating conflict is very important to help resolve the conflict in the watershed. So the second one is like our finding is that there are different type of outcomes that we can see from this conflict. First, so we look at three aspects actually in our framework. The first is whether or not the mediation help transform the actors' relationship and also the issues of the conflicts. And the second aspect then where we're looking at is the how whether or not mediation change the institutions or the rules working in for watershed management. And the third, we are looking at also the role of mediation in transforming the structural issues of the conflict. So within these three elements, we see that mediation can help so far help in these first two aspects. So first is mediation help changing the actor relationship between different parties in watershed conflict, where mediation help created a good environment for dialogue, for discussing the conflict issues, clarify their misunderstanding between parties, and clarify interests of different stakeholders, and they can rework on how to make these interests and values can be negotiated, and how they can make compromises to help make a better relationship between them. So yes, and the conflict issues, after everyone has a clear understanding of different interests and values, they seems create more understanding between them. And the second aspect that, like I mentioned, is mediation actually help create this changing in the institutional at the institutional level. When we talk about institution here, it's not only about the organization but also about the rules in use in watershed management. So from this, a lot of dialogues facilitated by mediators, they decided to create a network, watershed community network, that consists of all representative of these 23 community members, which meet, I think, at least once a month. And if there's any issue, they can make quicker, but at least in once a month, they have a large meeting to discuss issues in the watershed management. And I think this watershed network committee become in this deliberative institutional platform that help them resolve conflict even before the conflict escalated. So if there's any issue, so it helps create collaborative environment for long-term for management of the watershed. I think that's one of the biggest achievement of this mediation process. But yes, we interestingly that we also found that the third key finding is that there are limitations of mediation. I mean, we cannot say mediation is a silver bullet for resolving everything. So we found that mediation actually, there are limitations in terms of transforming structural issues underlying these conflicts. I mean, for example, these conflicts are not only about relationship between 2 or 3 actors, about land use, but also it is also created by broader structural issues about territorialization. For example, just was an example of how forest has been designated as a national park without consultation with the local communities, and how indigenous rights to land or forest are not strongly recognized in the country. And there are also several statutory regulations that are actually more of exclusionary protection of forest areas. For example, they exclude settlements, they exclude agricultural practices when some areas are designated as forest resources. So these kind of structural issues are not easily transformed only through mediation, but there's also need of follow-up for more political advocacy or policy advocacy to change this. Because, you know, for example, although this watershed network community can help discuss and make some decisions, but if we talk about legally, I mean, this platform is not legally recognized, and any decision from this platform of watershed network community may or may not be recognized by the government, because legally, yeah, they don't have legal basis and legal recognition for their rights or their authority to make decision. So these are an interesting finding of this also about some structural limitation of mediation in this case. Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing. It's truly a fascinating set of issues, rife with complexity. At our journal, Forest and Society, we always like to end on a note of capacity building, right? So,
yeah.
You know, if you were in these situations again, or if you were doing follow-up research, what kind of research questions would you suggest people follow up on? Where do you pick up the baton after the conclusions of this research? Where has the research moved to next?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, of course. I mean, because in our project we have, of course, limited resources. We have limited fundings. So yeah, we only have a limited number of, I think, only 6 case studies. And we are, because we have limited resources, so we strategically at that time to decide to only involve the successful cases, because we want to really understand what are the key factors that make conflict mediation successful. So I think if we have more money and more resources, I think it will be important also to do more research on the failed cases, to understand also what makes some conflict mediation unsuccessful. What are the factors? Is it about capacity, or is it about some technical issues, or is it more on because of that structural reasons that makes this some mediation is not successful? Yeah, I think that's the first one about the study on failed mediation is important. And the other aspect is, I think we need to do more is because at the moment when we do research on mediation, I mean, I can understand because of these complex issues, some people focusing on this complexity and only be able to do it in a limited number of case studies. Of course, there are advantages and disadvantages of doing case studies. With case studies, we have really deep understanding of the complexity of the cases, but it also will be we may gain different findings if we do it with a large number of quantitative analysis, for example. Of course, we will have different findings between if we do 6 case studies, and for example, if we do it more broader, 100 cases of mediation practice in Asia or in South Asia, using some qualitative computational analysis to see general pattern. of how the conflict, the pattern of the conflict itself, and a general pattern of conflict mediation. So we can have a stronger arguments of whether or not mediation really successful or effective method in resolving conflict, and also to understand better about what are the key factors, actually the main factors that makes mediation successful. I think, yeah, if we can do it, like make it more broader, large number of quantitative analysis, that will be really helps to strengthen our current findings. I think that's, yeah.
Well, great. Thank you for sharing with us today. We really appreciate it. Again, one of our more highly cited articles in Forest and Society, entitled Forest, Water, and People, the Roles and Limits of Mediation in Transforming Watershed Conflict in Northern Thailand. Check it out at our website at Forest and Society. Dr. Ahmad Dhiaulhaq, thanks again for joining us. All the best to you in your research and in your future endeavors. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, Micah. And yeah, thanks for Forest and Society for selecting our paper for this interview. Thank you so much.
Great. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.